Welcome back to the second half of our double header. Today we are making spaghetti con le polpette. Spaghetti with old school, authentic meatballs. And as with every meatball, I always start with 3 different kinds of meat in equal parts. In this bowl here I have 1 pound of lean ground beef, 1 pound of lean ground pork, and 1 pound lean ground veal. And yes, it makes a difference. Some people make their meatballs with just beef. You need the pork. You need a little bit of the fat. You need a little bit of that moisture that the pork gives. Plus it gives a flavor that's missing and you'll taste it when it's not there. And so my recipe has 3 different kinds of meat in equal proportion. To this, we're going to add a few simple seasonings and ingredients, but really we want the meatball to speak for itself in the end product. So what I have here in my bowl, my 3 different kinds of meat, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some simple flat leaf parsley. Now, this is the last of the parsley from the garden. So all I'm going to do, this is probably about, 6-7 sprigs of parsley. And all I want to do is just basically cut this very, very fine. There we are. And we are using stems and all. It's great flavor. Gives a little bit of texture. And really, we don't want to be wasting anything here. This is old school home cooking. This is not something that is, Italian food is really meant to be consumed in the home. It's really, it's home cooking, it's rustic stuff. It's made by traditionally the mothers, the grandmothers, and really this is food that feeds the soul. And with the weather changing and it getting a little bit colder out there, this is the kind of food that will set you straight. There we are. So we want to finely chop our parsley. There we are. We want to get all of this into our meat mixture. There we go. Absolutely every last bit. There we are. All right. So now to this mixture, what we will add, just going to get this up on our board here. What we will add is obviously a little bit of salt and pepper. This is just some fine sea salt. We want to make sure we give this a couple of good pinches of salt. We want to make sure we give this a good bit of freshly ground black pepper. Now I am going to give this as well a couple of tablespoons of dry oregano. There we are. I'm going to give this maybe 3.5 ounces of a good dry white wine. Just going to add that in. And then for seasoning as well, about 100, maybe 120 grams of grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. Now this is freshly grated on a microplane. Volumetrically it looks like it's more than it is, but really this is not a ton by weight. This is about 120 grams. Freshly grated makes a difference. You can substitute this for grana padana. You can substitute this for pecorino romano. In this application, I like to use the Parmigiano Reggiano. And so I'm going to add that in. There we are. And we are just going to mix all of this through our meat mixture. And the best way to do that is with a pair of impeccably clean hands. So I'm just going to mix this through. And then the last ingredient that we're going to add is our breadcrumbs. So some people add a fresh breadcrumb soaked in milk. I don't think you need to. I think a dry breadcrumb works better in this application. As the meat cooks and as it stews in the sauce, the dry breadcrumb will actually pick up more of the flavors. It'll pick up the juices from the meat. It'll pick up the herbs, the flavor of the herbs as they bloom. It'll pick up the flavor of the wine. And most notably, it'll pick up the flavor from the sauce that it's being cooked in. And so we want to make sure that we give this a good, thorough mix. Now the cheese that we add here, the Parmigiano Reggiano, is a little bit salty, so we want to take that into consideration and factor that in as we dose out our salt in here as well. There we are. Just want to get everything thoroughly and completely combined. We don't want to work this too much. We want to be somewhat gentle with it. The more we work this, the tougher the meatball will get. So what we want to do is just make sure that all of this is completely amalgamated in, and we've got a uniform distribution of flavors. There we are. Anything that's fallen out, we make sure we bring back in here. All right, so I'm just going to give my hands a quick wash. And then we will go right in with our breadcrumbs. There we are. All right. So now we want to add our breadcrumbs in. We don't want to add too much. We want to add maybe, I'd say about a cup or so of just a good Italian breadcrumb. Maybe a cup and a half. That's about it. There we are. That's all we want to add in here. There we are. And now all we're going to do is we're just going to mix this through. There we are. And like I said, as this cooks, as this stews, the breadcrumbs will absorb the flavors from the meat. They will absorb all of those herbs and spices, and they will absorb the flavor from the sauce that they're cooked in. So what we're going to do now is just make sure that these breadcrumbs are worked through. There we are. All right. And now we're going to start to shape these guys. All right, we've got good distribution. So what I want here now are meatballs that are about the size of a golf ball. There we are. We're just gonna form these by hand. There we are. That's about what you're looking for. So I am gonna take this mound of meat to task, and I will see you in a few minutes. We are back, and we have 15 beautiful meatballs. Now, albeit I know I said size of a golf ball, these are probably closer to the size of a tennis ball, but you know what? When you're hungry, you're hungry. So we got 15 of them here. Had they been the size of a tennis ball, we'd obviously get a few more, and we are ready to go. So I'm just heating up my pan here. What I want to do is just sear off these meatballs. They're still going to be fully raw in the middle, but I just want to get a little bit of a crust going on the outside. This is too much to go in one batch, so we're going to do this in a couple different batches. So all we're going to do is we're going to get a little bit of olive oil at the bottom of our pan. There we are. Put this over here. And then we're going to get, we're going to get half of these guys in there at a time. So there we are. Now we are going to leave just a little bit of space here. We don't want to crowd the pan. 4, 5, 6. There we are. And maybe one more in the middle. There we are. So I'm gonna get these going. This will take maybe between 10 and 12 minutes to get all sides fully browned. They're still going to be perfectly raw in the middle, but I do want to get a little bit of that sear and that crust on the outside. So I will see you in about 10 minutes. All right, we are back. We are just going to take the last of our meatballs out of the pan here. We've got some good color on these polpette. Now there is a nice bit of what we call fond or il fondo on the bottom of the pan. These are all the beautiful caramelized meat juices. Now we want to keep that. That's the reason why we actually do the caramelization in this pot. Some people do it in the oven and then they put them into the sauce. You lose this step if that's what you do. So what we want to do to start is I've got my sofrito. Now all this is, in a food processor, I've put in a couple of chilies, a couple of cloves of garlic, 2 carrots, 2 zucchini, 3 ribs of celery, and I've basically just chopped it down. The only thing I insist on not putting in the food processor is an onion. This is something that I chop by hand because I find when you put the onion in the food processor, it tends to overpower. A lot of the juice comes out of the onion, and it tends to overpower the vegetable medley. So what we want to do is we just want to put all of this into our pot, and we want to get this cooking down. Now the beauty is all of the moisture from these vegetables will loosen all of those caramelized sugars from the meat that are currently at the bottom of our pan. So we will take our onion here as well, and we will just scrape all of this into our pot. And the reason why we put all of these vegetables, number one, it's healthy. We want to lighten up our sauce. We also want to have the benefit nutritionally of all of those different vegetables that we have in there. So I'm just going to move this over, and we are going to start to stir this around. And I can already see some of those beautiful brown bits at the bottom of the pan starting to loosen. So to help that along, I'm going to add a little bit of salt, just a pinch of salt to my vegetables here, and that's going to draw the moisture out of those vegetables. A little pinch of freshly cracked black pepper, and I will continue to just work this around. Now all I want to do is just sweat these vegetables down. These are going to add a lot of sweetness and a lot of flavor to our sauce. If there are any stubborn bits at the bottom of our pot, we've got some red wine, and we're going to use that to finish deglazing the pot, which is basically going to lift up all of those beautiful caramelized meat juices, have those dissolve and become the foundation of our sauce. So there we are. We are just going to let this go. In the meantime, I've got, if you don't do your own tomatoes, if you don't make your own homemade tomato sauce and can it in the fall when tomatoes are beautifully in season and beautifully ripe, you can use what's called passata. You can buy the stuff. It's basically, it's strained tomatoes. All it is ground down tomatoes with the seeds and the skins removed. We do the same thing, only we jar these at home. And so what I do is I take the back of my knife. These had a lid on here, unscrewed the lid, and then I want to break the seal just with the back of my knife. There we are. When you smell this, it's the intensity of beautiful fresh tomato. We do this, every year, maybe every couple of years. If we make maybe a double batch, we might do it every couple of years. But really, there's no substitute for having this type of product when you're talking about making a proper, authentic, old school tomato sauce. And we'll go with one more. There we are. There we are. Just break whoa! Just break the seal, and we are ready to go. Oh, in here, besides tomatoes, I have a stalk of celery. I've got a few basil leaves, and I've got a little sprig of parsley, just to perfume the tomatoes as they sit on the shelf and as they wait for their turn to be used. So there we are. We're just gonna cook this down. As we see, our vegetables are sweating down beautifully. They're releasing a lot of liquid. I can see the bottom of my pan is pretty well clean. But we're gonna add the wine in there nonetheless. There we are. So we will get, this is a nice Chianti. We are gonna just get maybe, I'd say a good cup and a half of wine in there. And we're just going to use this to finish deglazing the bottom of our pot. Now wine is going to bring a little bit of acidity to the party. It's going to bring a little bit of fruitiness. You can use white wine, you can use red wine. I'm using red wine in this instance just because we've got a good bit of savoriness coming out of our meatballs. And so I think a red wine can stand up to that. As we cook this down, the alcohol will evaporate. What you're going to be left with is just the essential flavors of the wine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my tomatoes in here. I'm just going to leave in all the vegetables that are in there, the herbs, I should say. I'm going to fish those out a little bit later because they've done their job. There we are. We're going to get all 4 of them in here. There we are. I'm telling you, there are good quality passatas out there that you can buy. I usually buy some if I'm running short on my homemade sauce. I usually do buy good quality ones You can find them in better grocery stores from Italy, and they're great products to have available. They're available all year round, and they are really a high quality item if you don't make your own sauce. Otherwise, there's really no substitute for making your own, and I will just leave it at that. So there we are. We're just going to stir this around, and what I'm going to do, because this is a little bit thick, I do want to cook this for at least another probably 60 to 75 minutes in a low oven. I can cook this on the stove, but what I find is when you've got meat that's sitting on the bottom of the pot, sometimes on a gas stove or even on an induction burner, it tends to maybe scorch at the bottom. And so I cook this in a low oven, 350 degrees, uncovered, for about 60 to 75 minutes, and that will further reduce the sauce, intensify the flavors, and you don't have that risk of burning. So what I'm going to do is just rinse out all of these jars. There we are. And all I do is I put the lid on here. Now you want to make sure you hold this tight, otherwise you're going to get a tomato facial. There we are. We don't want to waste any of this. There we are. Make sure we get all of that loosened off the side of the jars. There we are. And we just rinse and repeat. There we are. And into our last one. There we are. And now we're just going to add a couple of final seasonings before we put this into our low preheated oven. There we are. All right. So we will give this just a stir to loosen up. There we are. All right. Now, like I said, I'm just going to fish out these herbs that were in the sauce to flavor it while these jars were sitting on the shelf. We're going to pull these guys out. They have done their job. There we are. So I'm just going to fish all this stuff out, and I will be back right after I throw our meatballs back into our pot. All right, we are back. All of our herbs and spices here have been removed, the ones that were sitting in the jar. All I want to do now is bring this mixture, oh, I forgot the celery here. All I want to do is bring this up to the boil before I get this going into the oven. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get all of our meatballs, and we are going to get these guys into the pool. And if there are any resting juices here that are left on the plate, we want to make sure that we pour these into our sauce as well. We don't want to leave any of this behind. There we go. This is going to be close. There we are. And done. So we will get all the resting juices off as well. There we go. All right. So we are just going to let this come up to the boil, and then we are going to get this off into our low oven to just blip away. In the meantime, we have a few seasonings. We've got a few bay leaves that we're going to be adding in. These are just 4 bay leaves. We've got 3 tablespoons of dry oregano that we're going to throw in here. We've got a pinch of salt because none of our tomato product here was seasoned with any salt. So we want to give this just a pinch of salt to start, and we will adjust the seasoning a little bit later on, and a little bit of freshly cracked black pepper. We're just going to give this a quick stir. As soon as this comes up to the boil, we will get this right into the oven, and I will see you in about an hour and a quarter. All right, we are back. It has been a little over an hour and a half that our sauce has been simmering away in the oven, and what we got now We've got some beautiful fresh basil. All I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these leaves from the stems. I've just rinsed this under the sink, and all I want to do now is get some of that fresh basil flavor into our sauce. As it's been simmering in the oven uncovered, it's been reducing, and really some of those bright flavors get a little bit muted as it's been simmering for that length of time. And so we want to brighten that up, we want to freshen that up a little bit. So we want to do that with some fresh basil. There we are. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cut this up into fine ribbons, and we're going to add it directly into our sauce. There we are. So we'll get all of these together. See if we can roll them up as best we can. There we are. Oh, just a smell. There we are. And these beautiful fine ribbons will just perfume the sauce and just freshen it up just in these last few minutes of cooking. There we are. And we're just going to run our knife through the other way as well. When we do this, very important to have a very sharp knife. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go into the oven. We will pull our sauce out. The water for our pasta should be just coming up to the boil. All right. There we are. Look at that. All right. Now what we will do here is we will just give this a little stir. See how this is coming along? Oh, just gorgeous. Oh, just the smell of that. Oh, love that. All right, now what we're going to do is we're just going to give this just a quick taste for seasoning. I think we need a little bit more salt. There we are. Remember, we undersalted as we were cooking initially, and this is something that we can fine-tune right at the end. There we are. And now what we will do is we will get all of this beautiful fresh basil right in there. All right. There we are. Now we know we have a beautifully sharp knife when the cutting board isn't green after we chop the basil. If your knife is dull, what happens is you crush the basil and all the chlorophyll ends up coloring your board. If your knife is beautifully sharp, you slice right through and you keep that beautiful vibrant green in the leaf, and most importantly, you allow it to flavor the sauce as it was meant to. There we are. Oh, love that. Love that. There we are. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to take some of this sauce and we're going to put some into our skillet here, because as we do with every pasta, we always finish the noodles directly in the pan. And so we want to make sure we have enough here to coat the pasta. We're making enough for this portion for 4 hungry people. And that should be plenty. There we are. And now we're just going to shut the oven off. We're going to put this big pot rather, back into the oven. You see I've changed my pot just because this one was a little bit bigger, gave me a little bit more space to stir stuff around, and so we transfer the contents from here to there before it went into the oven. There we are. And now I'm just going to throw this back into the oven. This should be coming up to the boil. I will see you in 2 minutes. Our pan of water is up to the boil. We're just going to take a few good pinches of coarse salt. There we are. And we are going to get this ready to go. As soon as that salt is dissolved, we will get our pasta and just right out of the package. And all we're going to do, toss this here, all we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to rotate our hands in opposite directions. And then all we're going to do is we're going to let that fall into our pot, and the pasta will disperse beautifully. All what we want is we don't want any of this pasta to stick together, and so we want this to remain as separate as possible and to cook as evenly as possible. So we're going to get this into our water. Once all of this drops below the surface, I'm going to start my timer. I've just got my sauce heating up and thickening up slightly. And in about 7 minutes, we will be going right to the plate. So I will give this a stir every couple of minutes, just so it doesn't stick. And I will see you in about 7 minutes. All right, our sauce has just come out of the oven. It's beautifully warm. And now what we're going to do is we are going to drain our pasta. We're going to take that off the heat. And just to make sure we're not burning ourselves here, a little bit of protection. Alright. There we are. Alright. Sure we drain this off. Now if our sauce was a little tight, we could always just add a little bit of that pasta water that has the starch from the noodles. Our sauce is just perfect. I don't think we need to add any additional moisture to that, but I do want to cook these noodles in this sauce for the last minute or so of cooking, so they are beautifully al dente. And we will just toss this around in the sauce. That surface starch from the noodle will continue to thicken that sauce. Oh, love that. We're just going to take some of the sauce from the edges and bring that right into the center. This smells absolutely fantastic. There we are. There we are. Now we're just going to cut the heat here and just give this one final stir. Oh, I'm telling you, the aromas coming off this pan, absolutely fantastic. All right, so what we're going to do now, we'll get a plate, or a bowl in this case. We will get a nice helping of our spaghetti. There we are. And there we are. And then what we will do is we will take our ladle. We will finish this with just a little bit of additional sauce. There we are. There we are. We don't need much because every noodle is coated. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And I know this looks like a lot, but it really isn't. And then what we're going to do So we're going to get one of our meatballs, and we are going to put that right on top. Now this is an absolute dish that we can be proud of. What we're going to do is get a fork, and do a little taste test here. So the true test of a meatball is whether we can use a fork to break that apart. And look at how tender that is. No knife necessary. Just flake another little piece off there. Make sure that we mix all of our pasta in with our cheese. And we'll get one beautiful forkful here just to taste. And we'll make sure we get a little piece of that meatball as well. Oh, look at that. Mmm. 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 The noodles are beautifully al dente. The sauce is deep, it's rich, but it's still fresh and fragrant because of that basil. The meatball barely holds together. Beautifully moist, beautifully flavorful. This is a meal you have to try. Warms you from the inside out. This is food for the soul. This is Coach Joe saying, you know what, I hope you try this. As always, please do like and subscribe, share the content if you find it useful, and I will see you on the next one.